So eventually, with individuality, you reach a point where you're damaging to other people, and you leave behind no legacy. Like you haven't left behind a good family. You haven't left behind like a foundation that will survive beyond you, that will help other people. You came, you ate, you shat, you died, and no one will remember you. That's the extreme of individuality.
Hi and welcome to the weekly Vasl, ladies and gentlemen. This is Ahad again with from a guest from the Great White North. George Habib is here with us, and I would like to give the floor to George Habib immediately. But before, I want to just give a little bit of a setting. We are going to be talking about the life of an immigrant. George was born in the Lebanon, but then he has lived some of his life in Dubai, and then he was finally here in Canada, where he has spent and he is still living. My questions to George are basically about the life of going from a collectivist, community-based society to an individual society. So, without further ado, George, how's the weather in Canada?
Hey, I had weather is cold. You know, like you said, I used to live in Dubai, and now I live in Montreal, Canada. So I left plus 40 degrees Celsius weather for minus 40 degrees Celsius weather. You know, I can't have the middle ground. It's going good. It's going good. And as you said, this is the Great White North in more ways than one.
No, that's already a good start, right? The Great White North. Tell me a little bit about your life back in Lebanon and your life in Dubai and how that differs from the life you have right now in Canada.
Right. So the thing is, like, I was born in Lebanon, but I was raised in Dubai. So I kind of alternated between both countries. But like again, like because I was never really living in each country, I was switching between them. I cannot say fully what life was in each country, being like a person from that specific area, but I can tell you what it's like in general. So in Lebanon, Dubai, we are Arabs mostly, and there's a lot of community-based societies there. There's a lot of focus on the family, on the parents, on the kids. There's less of a focus on being dependent on external factors like companies or governments, which will become more relevant as we keep talking. And I don't know, for me that was normal, you know.
Yeah.
Like for me, it didn't make sense that I would stop being my mother and father's kid, even if past 18. I'm 29 and I'm still my mother's baby. Sometimes that's a good thing when I get fed. Sometimes it's a bad thing when she talks down to me in front of other adults. But I guess I have to live with that.
That is part and parcel of a Middle Eastern mom.
100%, 100%. Like, you know how they like always complain you don't do anything, but then you try to do something and then they complain even more, like you're replacing them. Yeah,
So,
so yeah, like for me that's normal, you know. It's normal for me to always be in touch with my grandmother, always visit my grandmother. It's normal for me to like have 100 cousins I stay in touch with. How we're related, I don't know, but the blood is in there somewhere. And yeah, that's basically the Middle East. It's a very traditional based society. It revolves around family and God, and then work and government kind of comes third or fourth,
yeah.
which is
So,
completely different from where I live now.
yeah, I understand, and we want to get there, but I want to focus a little bit first just on those countries because it's nice to fantasize and reminisce about the good old days, right? But we know that the Middle East is not perfect, right? I also was born and raised in the Middle East, George, and then I moved to Pakistan, and from Pakistan I moved to Turkey, then back to Pakistan, then back to Turkey, and then I'm here finally. So I also moved around a lot in my life, and when I see and I look back and I go like, oh, life was so good there. Life was so good there. And but that's recency bias talking, right? Because right now life feels shitty, so you want to always go back to the good old days. You know how I know that exists? It's a wonderful story. Uh, I have a normal phone like any other person, right? A smartphone that is keeping me connected to the world. It is pretty fast. So I was like, you know what? This is the bane of existence. This thing that I'm recording on, this is not good. All right. So I will go back to the good old days. I ordered a Nokia phone, and I'm not joking to you, George. Within one day, I returned it because I was like, this is not as good as I remember it, right? So
Nokia, the one
the
with the snake on it.
yeah, the one with the snake on it, the flip phone that you could go up and down, but it was so shit. Nothing was working in it properly. So slow, for God's sake, I would open WhatsApp and I realized that was normal back then. But now it isn't. Now you open WhatsApp and if you have to wait 1 second, it irritates you. So where I'm taking this conversation is living in Canada, living in the Netherlands, it feels like, you know what, the good old days, it was life was much better. I do not know if you've been regularly to Lebanon or Dubai anytime soon, but now going back, you still feel like it's the place where you grew up, is the place where you still want to be, and why?
No, I don't feel it's the place I grew up because, like, everything changes. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. Lebanon in general has changed for the worst. I don't know if you're aware, there was a big economic crash. Now there's like war on the southern border with Israel, and just it's a bit of a mess. So it's not the Lebanon I grew up with, which was more of like there was always tension, there was always issues, but like it was more like peaceful and relaxing. Nature, being with my grandmother, who she's still alive, thank God. I'm planning to visit her soon, and I have good memories of my childhood in Lebanon, but then like the present is quite depressing. Dubai has changed in a different way. The Dubai I grew up in was more, I want to say, balanced. You worked, you socialized, you had your friends and everything. But now, like being the age I'm at, like growing up, Dubai is now in a place where it's an economic powerhouse, with respect to the Emiratis. They really built an economic success. But like what that also means is that there's more of a fixation on work and career, to the point where you really don't have time for your friends and family.
Yeah.
So on one side, I have Lebanon, which has become a bit of a disaster. The other side, Dubai, where life has become career. So yeah, to answer your question, it is not like my childhood at all. And that makes me question, like, am I special in that my childhood areas have now become vastly different? Or was my childhood actually a bubble created by my parents, who are dealing with the same problems I am dealing with now, which aren't really unique problems? It's more of like uh, a right of age problem.
I really like where you're going with this. That is it something that every generation goes through? Because I believe it is, but just the problems are different, right? Every generation goes through their own set of problems. There was this Indian comedian, Veer Das was his name. I do not know if you know him, but he came up with a very good concept of breaking the glass ceiling. He said that every generation has their glass ceiling that they're trying to break, right? For us, it was arranged marriage versus love marriage. For our parents, you can also claim it was arranged marriage versus love marriage, right? For us, it was maybe gay and lesbian, right? And for you guys, it's binary or far left or far right or whatever issues that you have. Every generation comes to its own problem, and it has to pass that barrier, right? Touching a boy or a girl back then when I was young was unacceptable. You know what we used to do when we used to date each other? I remember, because I remember my high school sweethearts. All we could do was just call each other on the phones in the corner of our rooms. That's the only thing we could do. And it was all very cute and cringy and romantic, in the sense cheesy, that you're just talking about how I want to hold your hand and how I want to walk you down the streets and I want to go on the beach with you. Not how you do talking now, because now you do a bit more of a vulgar expression in how you're flirting with people. So things have changed, George, right? And it doesn't feel like it's the same as it's ever going to be. What my problem is with this fixation of the past is it creates an identity when you're living abroad. So now you're in Canada, I'm in the Netherlands. We're facing very similar issues of okay, who am I? Am I Dutch? Am I Canadian? Or am I Lebanese? Am I Saudi? Or am I Pakistani? Or am I Emirati? Right. So
Right.
it's this flux of going too foreign for home, too foreign for here problem going on. Now, why I have a problem with this is I actually see second generation Pakistanis living here, and they are in their own bubble, George. They do not integrate, they do not assimilate. They're like, this is bad, this is haram, and what I do and what my family does is great, because that's how we were raised. But I see them and I go like, have you actually been to Pakistan? Because I have. Pakistan is not what you guys are. Pakistan has really changed. But they don't know. They went in the 80s and they think it's still the 80s there back in Pakistan because they don't go visit more. So what are your thoughts on that? That for a person who comes to a new country, has to find their own identity, doesn't feel like they belong to any particular group. How do you deal with that?
Well, for starters, I honestly, me personally, I don't blame them for doing that, because when you come into a country, and let's use Canada for example, you try to integrate, you learn the national anthem, you become a citizen, and then even the local, and this is something I deal with time to time, and then the local Canadians basically don't see you as Canadian, no matter how much you have the passport, no matter how much taxes you pay, no matter how much you start to sound like them, talk like them, they'll never see you as Canadian. So I feel like it's natural for especially young men and women to kind of say, well, okay, this new country I'm a part of isn't really accepting me. Maybe I should go back to my roots. And in our cases, the roots is the Middle East. So me personally, I don't engage with my roots, and I'll explain why after. But I am starting to see people, like you said, they've never been to the Middle East. They're second generation or third generation, but then they grew up living on their grandmother's stories, their parents' stories. And when we say stories, we tend to say the positive aspects of the culture back home. Like we will say, for example, the beautiful mountains of Lebanon. My dad will actually talk about how when he was a young lad, he would go into the forests, he would find wild watermelons, he would put them in the river, make them cold, and eat it like sweet nectar. Like this is the language they use, and then they'll say, "Oh, we were always together, George. We were always happy, George. Everything was amazing. Everything was heaven." And then they leave certain stuff out. What my dad left out was there was a civil war, like there was conflict, there was poverty. And then, like, I feel like in the other countries like Pakistan, India, Philippines, Africa, they when they talk about the good times, they're leaving out the poverty, the unaddressed mental health issues, the conflict, the lack of services, the lack of jobs. Like they left out, oh, I had to work in a coal mine, oh, I had to make my hands bleed stitching clothes. Because when we tell stories, we talk about the positive stuff. And when, as a child, you hear all about this positive stuff, like it's the land of Harry Potter or something, you want to go there. But what you don't realize is that once you go back to Pakistan or Lebanon or other countries, like the, it's actually even worse than the time of your parents, because now the poverty is everywhere. There is trash. I'm talking about Lebanon. I can't speak for other countries I haven't been to. In Lebanon, there's trash everywhere. The river is polluted. The sea is polluted. The forests are chopped down. There's crooks everywhere. People are having their cars stolen. And before, when my parents would talk about how like everyone was generous, now people are only superficially generous to the point where they can gauge how much worth you can bring them, like how much of a benefit you can bring them. And that could be a person, your long distance cousin who pretends you're like the closest bloodline ever, who actually wants some of that Canadian money, or like the bazaar salesman who acts like, oh, you're my guest, and they want to sell you an overpriced traditional dress made in China. So I don't blame them, because the parents put such a positive image. But also,
Yeah.
not just the parents and grandparents put such a positive image of the old country. The current country they're in, especially if it's North America or Western Europe, again, first of all, they will never see you as one of them. And second of all, there is no community. There's no community. Like here
Yeah.
in Canada, the Canadians have gotten rid of their own national anthem in schools. Us immigrants, we never asked them to do that. They got rid of like they're calling themselves as if they are a racist culture with a racist history. So they don't want to teach it anymore. They're tearing down their statues. They're getting rid of their like traditional architecture, things like this, traditional symbols. So it's like we're leaving. So in the mind of like a person like me, a young person between countries, we're leaving an idealized country. We've left an idealized country back home. We've ended up in a place that by its own admission keeps telling us it's not the greatest place. So then where do we stick?
That's a wonderful way of looking at it, George. And I have some pushbacks or in some comments as well, because I cannot speak for everybody, of course, and I do understand the need for belonging, right? But you know why I believe Western Europe and Northern America is so scrutinized? is because of their own failure and their own grandeur uh, admission of, oh no, look, we are the beacon of human rights, we're the beacon of identity, we are here to support everybody. Because to be really honest, George, if you go to Lebanon as a foreigner, you will be asked to integrate. You will be forced to integrate, right? If you have to work there, if you have to live there, you need to learn Arabic, you need to do all of those things, right? If you go to Pakistan or India, you will be forced. Well, India a little bit less, Pakistan a little bit less, because we glorify white people thanks to our colonial past. But the more point is, wherever country you go to China, go to Japan. Japan has an immigration rate of 2%, right? If
Mm.
you go there, you will be expected to know Japanese. You'll be expected to know their culture. Western Europe and Northern America is the only place where you can go and be like, you guys are not doing it according to how I feel. And they will have to accept it. And I am baffled by that. Why? Why do you have to tear down your own statues? Why do you have to erase your own history because you're like, it doesn't make some of us feel nice? It's okay. You're right. You're not supposed to. The racist history is wrong, but it is history. You cannot remove it. You cannot try to watermark it, or what do you call it, blacklist it or something, that it didn't happen. It happened, and you have to own up to it. And
Whitewash
from
it,
there,
is
you,
what you're saying.
yeah, you don't need to whitewash. You don't need to remove it. You need to acknowledge it, heal the trauma, and move forward from it. So the problem that I have of, as you said, the people here don't accept us as our own, but who will? And why would they? And these are very difficult questions for me to ask, and I understand these are difficult questions for you to hear, maybe, because my daughter is going to be raised here, my wife was raised here, and she feels the same. She's like, I'm in the government. She is working in the government of Holland, and sometimes her colleagues, her white colleagues, come up to her and she's like, oh, what are we trying to do here? We're trying to make this place a very inclusive space for everybody. And then she turns towards my wife and be like, also for people like you. And she's like, what do you mean people like me? I'm Dutch. I lived here more than most of my life. And I'm like, yeah, but you're not white. And they're used to white people. I'm not a sympathizer, but I understand basic tribalism. It's basic tribalism, George. If you look like me, if you sound like me, if you think like me, you and I are going to be friends. And someone who doesn't look like me, doesn't think like me, doesn't feel like me, I will be a bit scared of them, because if I wouldn't, they probably would kill me back in the day, right? So it's triggered into us. And yes, it doesn't apply right now, but the roots are still there. So of all what I said, my daughter's going to be raised in this world where she might feel like I don't belong here. And of course, she can't go back to Afghanistan or Pakistan because they're also not going to accept her, because they're like, she doesn't know anything about our culture because she was raised in the West. So she will have the same problem of, where do I belong? Where do I belong? But I'm like, why is it a problem if they, the white nation, the white people of this nation don't accept you, but the immigrants do? So why is that a problem? Do you have anything to say on that?
To clarify your question, what do you mean by the white people don't accept you? I understand, but what do you mean by the immigrants accept you? Like when you
Like, if
form your own community, like a Chinatown
yeah,
or things
yeah,
like that.
yeah. Like, I'm saying, like, why is it so important for us to be feeling accepted in this country, such so diverse as North America and Western Europe? Why do we get agitated? Why do you get agitated when someone says you're not Canadian?
Look, when I was younger, I did get agitated. Now, not so much, because now I learned you kind of have to build your own community wherever you go.
Yeah,
But look, I 100% believe human beings are meant to be social creatures. And when we are by ourselves, we wither and die, metaphorically, but like even physically, we can see that.
yeah,
So when we come to a country and they say there is no culture to join, everything is, I don't know what you want to call it. They're like everything is just fluid, les avis. If you don't find your own group, you will dissolve. Your identity will dissolve. Your family unit will dissolve. Your bonds to other people will dissolve. You have no heritage. And that is unfortunately what we see in North America. You know, and what happens when all that stuff dissolves? We see it in white Canadians. In Montreal, and a lot of Quebecois are not happy to hear this. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's getting harder and harder to see white faces because of all immigration coming in. But if you want, but you look at the immigrants, you see them, they're in a foreign country, they're thriving. Why are they thriving? Because they're sticking together, they're building businesses together, they're keeping their traditions together, they're supporting each other. This could be Indian immigrants, Arab immigrants, Jewish immigrants, any immigrants, they're thriving. But you don't see white Canadians thriving in the city. Why? Because they have no bonds to connect to each other. They destroy their own bonds. They said there's no such thing as like white heritage. There's no such like Quebec heritage is very racist, all that stuff. And you know where you will see the average, not the average, I don't want to say that, but you know where you will see most white faces in Montreal? Homeless, on the streets, looking for the next alcohol, looking for the next drugs, begging. Why are they on the streets? Because they have no parents to support them. The parents here basically kick out their kids at 18. Sometimes I've seen it even earlier. They see the kids as a financial burden. They have no church or mosque or synagogue to help them when their parents abandon them because they say religion is evil. There's no God. We have to believe in science and all that stuff. So no religion, no family. That's gone. And in terms of a culture, I disagree with Canadians who say there's no Canadian culture. In fact, what brought a lot of Arabs, I'm speaking for Arabs, I can't speak for others, here in Canada in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s was Canadian culture. Because for that period of time, everyone saw Canada as the peacekeeper, the lumberjack in the woods, the suburban areas, close families making their own cabins. They have their own tradition. They have the Canadian way of life, where it is a distinct identity, but it's an accepting culture of other people. They've gotten rid of that. So now you have local born Canadians with no family to raise them right or support them, no religion to keep them going, and no culture to like identify as a part of. What do they have left? They have the government handouts. That's the person raising them or I don't know, nourishing them with like welfare. And instead of like the family barbecue, instead of like family outings, instead of like building a family, they they can't afford a house. No one wants to get married. Their only consolation, and maybe I'm very like simplifying the situation: drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, pornography. They end up on the streets. They have no foundation. So me as a Lebanese, when I come here and I say, "Oh, I'm sick of the Lebanese way of life. I'm sick of people being angry all the time. I'm sick of people yelling all the time. I'm sick of like all these family conflict. I want to become Canadian." After a few years, I see what the average Canadian, not the average, after a few years, I see like Canadians on the streets with no like connections. I'm like, okay, you know what? Maybe it is time to go back to my roots, even though it's not perfect. So that's why I feel when people come to these countries, the ones who fear being like dissolved metaphorically, they go back to their community. They form communities based on their heritage, based on their ethnicity, based on their religion. We can argue some of these communities are good, there's benign. We can argue some of these communities are being hijacked by individuals who seek power. But for me, like that's the basic reason of why they go back to the community.
There's a lot to unpack there. Of course, the disclaimers you've already given, but we're not speaking for a lot of people, right? We're only speaking from our own experiences. So we don't know for sure about any of this, but in our own experiences, I understand what you mean. Europe is a bit different, right? Because Europe has its culture. Because Canada and the US, of course, were immigrants themselves, white people going there. But here, the Dutch have a very thriving culture.
Mm.
And for us immigrants, it's a boring culture, but it is culture nevertheless. Their foods, their food, they have food, they have their music, they have their cultural activities. The fact that when you graduate, you put your bag outside of your house on a pole, right? You do these things, and I always tell them to not lose these things, because here also the same problem is happening. Some liberal sides are arguing against those things, that why this, why that. Black faces are also a part of culture here, and they're
Are you
trying to
talking about the
ban it.
elves?
The elves, yeah. and
Yeah.
and I don't know how to feel about that, because as I said, everyone has done something, George. Everyone has done something, and if you try to hide it or remove it, doesn't mean you didn't do it anymore, and it doesn't mean that you're correcting for it. It's not. If you think that this is a way of you compensating or correcting, you're not. You can give reparations if you feel so guilty, but you by removing it from the public eye, you are not really solving as the way you were solving. Like, for example, you're an Arab. I was raised in Saudi Arabia. Did you know slavery was started by the Arabs, not by white people, by the Arabs.
I don't know about slavery, but the slave trade, yes.
Yeah, I know,
Slave
but also
trade.
the first official recorded slaves were imported into Arabs, into the Muslim empires, into the Arab empires from North Africa or Middle Africa. That's how we have a lot of dark-skinned people suddenly in the Middle East. How did they show up, right?
Also, if I may, I had people don't realize like slavery may have ended in the US in like 1865. It, there's a dark period in Arab history where it still continued in the Arab territories, like especially in North Africa, into like 1920, 1930, 1940.
Dude,
Even
right
now, there are
now,
still some slave markets in the remote regions in North Africa.
yeah, but not just North Africa, the Middle East. That's modern slavery, man. My dad was part of it, right? Modern slavery. He could not own his own companies. He had a thriving business that was not on his name. It was on an Arab guy's name who could, in theory, close everything or steal everything in one go, and my dad couldn't do anything legally about it, right? These people had to give away their passports, had to live in one room, 20 people. The Qatar World Cup just happened. Amazing World Cup, by the way. But we've heard the stories of how the things were built, how many people had to die. That's modern slavery. My point is, to bring everything back, the difference between everyone else in the West, in my eyes personally, is that the inclusivity that the West tries to propagate to everybody, can look at us, it's it's backfiring on them. Because you go to any other country in the world, they will not be as accepting and as open like hands and arms as the West tries to be. And because of that, they have their own culture, they have their own themes, they have their own things, and it doesn't need to be collectivist, right? It can be individualistic as well. If you go to China, well, not China's not a really good example, but if you go to, for example, Latin America, in the south, Chile is very individualistic, so apparently that's why a lot of Germans also are in Chile right now. But they have a colonial history, of course, but they also now are very individualistic. If you go to the north in Europe, Finland is also very individualistic. Even like Netherlands, Germany are more individualistic than Spain, Italy, and Greece. They're much more collectivist, and they're white people. If you go down to Italy, it's a joke here in Holland that when you drive down to Italy, it feels like you're in a third world country because that's how it feels to
Have
them.
you driven down the Montreal? It's a fourth world country. The roads are never fixed. Everything is rusty. Everything's broken. There's
I
potholes everywhere.
I'm privileged. The Dutch and the Germans, well, mostly the Dutch. I'm not joking, George. One of the best infrastructure you'll ever see in terms of roads. So I'm spoiled.
I
So
have no doubt. I have no doubt. Come to Canada, one of the worst infrastructure you'll see in the world. They built
I
it in
had
1970. It was beautiful in 1970. It's no longer 1970.
to bring the conversation back. The root cause, well, I cannot claim the root cause, but the cause in my eyes is this spread of individuality that's happening, right? And I have nothing against individuality. I think it's one of the reasons the West have thrived so far for the last hundreds of years. But now, slowly, we are seeing the limits of individuality, right? You are from a collectivist culture. What are your thoughts on individuality?
Look, I think I touched upon this. Individuality has its place. Me, I don't believe in absolutes. I don't believe in polarity, one or the other. There's got to be a mix of everything. I'll talk about the good of individuality first. It's good not to always be stuck to your mommy's side or daddy's side when you're 30. You know, it's good to go out there, be your own person, build your business, live for yourself, do things you enjoy, and not like be a complete martyr to your family. Because in Lebanon and I assume Pakistan, we do see these things where you are expected to be the martyr of your family, and even especially if you're a girl, you have to you have to give up your own happiness. You have to marry the people your family wants. You have to follow in the same trade as your father. You have to, I don't know, like do whatever you can to help cousins you've never seen before and will never benefit you. And you can't you have to be a doctor, you have to be a lawyer, you can't be an artist, you can't be a singer, you can't be a podcaster. Me, I think I'm an anomaly because my dad is actually super supportive. You know, my mom, she's working around to it, but my dad's actually super supportive. But like, yeah, that's the positive of individuality is you can pursue your own happiness. It's like be selfish once in a while, you know? Do what you want. And as an individual, you have your rights. You know, you can say what you want, you can follow what you want, you can own what you want. There are good things to individuality, especially when there are a lot of bad things to like the communal traditions back home. But then there's a limit. I like there's a point where individuality becomes greed, becomes vanity, becomes selfishness, where you do everything you want and damn be the consequences for other people. You know, you may abuse your workers, you may milk them for every money, but they will never have a living wage under you. You may, I don't know, get into relationships and like completely traumatize the other person with controlling behavior or things like this, even though even though you did that because it's what you really wanted. And in the end, like I've seen it in Canada where you'll see parents completely prioritize their own happiness over that of their children, and they see nothing wrong with it. They s- like this like they don't say, "Oh, I need to support my kids through college." They don't say, "I need to help my kids with their payments." They don't say, "I need to teach my kids this and that." They say like, "No, I want to be happy." So eventually with individuality you reach a point where you're damaging to other people, and you leave behind no legacy. Like you haven't left behind a good family. You haven't left behind like a foundation that will survive beyond you, that will help other people. You came, you ate, you shat, you died, and no one will remember you. That's the extreme of individuality. And here in
Yeah.
Canada, when you keep promoting such individualism, again, you see like the disbandment of the family unit. No one will help each other. No one will support each other. People are kind of looking for how they can use you, like whether they can use you sexually, whether they can use you to get your money, whether they can use you for self validation. And the second that other person needs something, they disappear.
I
That's my
understand.
thought.
Yeah, I understand the limits of individuality, and I agree with some of it. Of course, there are some things I also disagree with, and I want to focus more on you are trying to disband the family unit, and you're trying to basically the concept of individuality is selfishness, George. It's literally the element of it, right? The reason you broke away from community is because you're like, I need to do what I want, and my happiness comes first. And the government now is trying to embrace your individuality by providing you all the things you need. So now the government is playing the role of a family unit, right? And now instead of a family, it has millions of people under it who it needs to provide payments to, or it needs to provide relief to, it needs to provide guidance to, but it cannot teach them everything what a family can teach, right? It can even teach you taxes, for example. It can teach you how to do change a tire. It can teach you everything, a government, if they want to, but they cannot teach you the bonds that you have to make with other people because that has to happen through natural means. And due to these individuality elements, you see people always, as you said, on edge to look after themselves. And
It's
yeah,
dog eat dog. That's the
yeah,
expression.
yeah. I personally do not believe that everyone is out to stab you in the back. That's not my personal belief, but I do see that more often the case. But I have a different experience because in my family, when they come here and I'm living here and I go back to Pakistan, I see it the other way around. So I'm really curious to hear your thoughts about it. When I'm here and I go to a garage to get my car fixed, or if I'm here and I go to get something fixed, I feel like there's inherent trust because the person is validated, verified, and if the person is trying to scam me, I can always report them.
When you
But if
say
I
here,
go
do you mean the Netherlands
the
or?
Netherlands, but when I go back to Pakistan, I am suspicious and shady of every single person who comes across me. Is that my bias speaking, or there is some truth to that the collectivist cultures also have less trust?
Look, it's a case of like there's no such thing as one right thing. Two things can be right. For me, with Pakistan and Lebanon, because in Lebanon, same thing. I don't trust garages in Lebanon unless it's a cousin that I trust. I don't trust the bazaar salesmen. They pretend we're brothers to sell me something. I don't trust the. I don't trust like a lot of women who talk to me there because they know I have a Canadian passport. They want to get married. But like I think we shouldn't conflate one selfishness caused by poverty or bad economics, so you're put in a survival mode, or selfishness caused by like a lack of morals or community or culture, in which case you're put in greed mode. Because back in our countries, we just changed to a materialist society or a manufacturing society, if you will, where before we were farmers. Once we had enough, all we did was we had to farm, raise animals, we shared the produce, we supported each other through famine, through winter, through things like this. So it was enough. When we had enough, we were communal, and that's the time our parents remember, the agrarian time where they didn't need much. They didn't need a television, they didn't need a DVD player, they didn't need like mobile phone or a fancy car. But now, unfortunately, in Lebanon and Pakistan, we're I feel we were rushed into this manufacturing age with like very little transition. So now we are a country with very little capital, trying to earn very advanced things. So a shortcut would be trying to screw people over. That's what I see. Here in the West, it's more like there's no you're kind of encouraged not to have an obligation to anyone, not to have loyalty to anyone, even in relationships, because we see in the West the media literally says like have an affair, live your life to the fullest, cheat on your wife, cheat on your husband. And
Do
we'll
they
even
really
see
say that?
shows where like a wife will cheat on the husband, and everyone's like you go girl, like and then we'll have shows on Netflix where like children like talk back to their parents like you can't tell me what to do. It's like excuse me, Ahad, me and you we're from the brown community. Do we talk to our parents like that?
Yeah, it's. I agree with what you're saying. It is a very difficult situation that you've come to, that the limits of individuality has become overblown. But I feel like that's also what media does. The people online are a selection bias of that, right? Like those people online are those people who want to talk more, want to come up with radical ideas. Because George, to be really honest, if you say on social media that I'm happy, life is good, I love my wife, you're not gonna get any likes or views.
You'll be
But if you
attacked.
say like, yeah, no, not even attack, you're gonna get dissolved, as you said. I really love that analogy. You're gonna get dissolved into the sea of tweets. But if you
Mm.
say something like, I think married women who cheat are gorgeous, and it's always the man's fault, you're gonna get more likes, you're gonna get
Mm.
more virality, you're gonna, even if it's not good or bad, you will get more exposure. So social media by design, and media in general by design, likes to propagate extreme ideas. And that's why you see polarization, right? That's why you see stuff on Netflix. It is a representation of us. It's not a representation of what we want. It's a representation of what a subset of us want, because they're the loudest in the room. On social media, everyone claims we want this. Where is the representation? And they get it. But what about the rest? We don't scream because we're not that active on social media. Same is what I argue about politics. The reason that here in the Netherlands you have a far right party now is because that far right party keeps screaming, or like conservative party, ultra nationalist party kept screaming, and people listened. And the population that came out to vote was the population who was like, yeah, I'm going to vote because this guy speaks my thing. And a lot of the people who did not agree with it didn't come to vote. So what I'm trying to say is that inaction actually breeds more polarization, because you're not doing anything, or you're trying to step out of it, gives more room for the loudest people in the room to speak for a longer time. So if I hear those stories that, okay, children doing this, or people celebrating these kind of infidelities or something like that, or statues being taken down, all of that, it is the loudest people in the room trying to take over everything, and the government, because they're guilty, or they're like, you're right, every vote counts, everything is correct, so they give in to the pressure. So what kind of balance can we find? Because what I see is, I see a you, And the U is basically, well, not a U, but like an inverted U, because what I see is basically on the left individualism, on the right collectivism, and the extremes of both are bad in terms of well-being. But the middle point is where the U is on the highest, right? So you need to find a middle ground. What can you, from your experience of living in these multifaceted countries, can show a middle ground where individualism and communalism or a collectivist society can coexist, in which you can get the best of both worlds?
It's tough to answer, man, because like I'm still an individual right now, so not that much experience. But like I think everything was correct in the 90s, in the 80s, in the 70s. Like where as close as correct could be, where people still worked, they still went outside, they still had fun, but they came back and were still part of a family. Like they still like, especially in Canada, they still like enjoyed the Canadian flag. Like they still waved the Canadian flag. They still learned the Canadian national anthem in schools. They still like valued Canadian heritage because like Canadians, they have a big heritage in World War I, World War II, and I think I think that was the perfect, not the perfect, like I think that was the most balanced time, like because you can't be super traditional to the point where like you feel like your family's choking you, you have no chance to express yourself or things like that. But then you can't be so open that you have no foundation in your life, that everything's a free for all, and that you're not really building anything. I still think we live this life to make a family, have children, and pass on the next era to them. For Canada specifically, I think they need to stop crapping on their own heritage. Because I gotta be honest, I did not, me and my family, we did not come to Canada to be Lebanese. If we wanted to stay Lebanese, if we wanted to make a piece of Lebanon in Canada, we would have stayed in Lebanon. We came to Canada because we knew from the stories of our cousins already there, already Canada, already Canadian, that it was such a good country. You could buy a house for your family. Your family would go to the best schools. You guys could have a good living, a good job. You guys could embrace being Canadian. And then, as the story goes, we come here. There's no heritage. They're getting rid of their own heritage. No one can afford a house. No one can make a family. There's no ties that connect each other. I think the family unit is the biggest thing. Making a family and doing some self-sacrifice for that family is the biggest thing that can save a society. Culture, that's like the flavor you're born with, that's like the flavor of your ramen mix when you were born. Individualism, that's nice and everything for a certain period of your life, but we have to come back to the family unit. We have to find a good partner who we can build with, and then once we have kids, we have to accept the fact that we're not individuals anymore. We have to take care of our kids, but that our kids don't owe us for being born. They're not beholden to us, but that we need to let them kind of make their own decisions, find their own ways, stop them when things go too extreme, but let them figure themselves out. Like where the parents are supposed to be the foundations, not the chains. If I want to be poetic about it.
I don't think your mom will appreciate what you just said at the end,
My mom's
but
not a chain. My mom's a whip and a speakerphone and the pain in my ass. But I love her.
but all
She,
moms are
she
the same.
knows. She knows I call her the pain in my ass because I tell her to her face. But we love each
No, what
other.
I think all moms, at least Eastern moms, are like this, and I think I wouldn't, to be honest, I wouldn't change it to the world. I am guilty of feeling a little bit sad for my daughter that she will not be raised with parents who have similar tendencies as our parents did. Because yes, they were a bit annoying, they were a bit toxic. You can argue, but they were what felt like home. If my daughter gets whatever she wants because she asks for it and we don't want to argue against it, I don't think I'm going to enjoy that, but I don't know if I can say no. So it's a it's a difficult thing to be in, George. And I heard you say that the family unit is gone and I want to build a family. And I hear that you're an eligible bachelor in Lebanon. So my question is, why not? Even if those girls just want to have you for your passport, you have a dazzling personality. You can convince them when you're here. So
Oh.
why are you not going for that?
Just something I want to say before, like about what you said about like concerns about raising your daughter. It's like we don't have to be. I just want to say we don't exactly have to be like our parents, but we don't exactly have to be like so free and open minded. We have to mix the best of both worlds, and like the beauty of our discussion right now is that we can recognize what's good, what's bad, and try to implement it in our own lives. Back to
Indeed.
the thing of like why am I still single despite my readiness to mingle.
Not you're
uh
ready, because if you're
I'm
eligible
not.
for your
I
passport.
think this is also like my Indian and Pakistani friends also like talk about this, where it's like, why don't I just like ask my mom, mommy, please, you know, the girls from the village, you know, like see if anyone has a good daughter, like a nice from a good family. Like I'm ready. I got the passport. I got my way. I got my salary. Like I'm not there yet. I'm not going to consider that until maybe like 35. I'm 29. I still hope to
Yeah.
find the girl of my dreams out there through the sea of girls of my nightmares, you know, because so far it's kind of been rocky. But yeah, I'm not there yet. I think it's still a good thing. It's because, you know, people call it arranged marriage, but I like to call it more like traditional matchmaking, because like arranged implies there's no choice. I still think it's a good thing where, you know, if love hasn't been so good for you in North America or even Europe, but I speak mostly from North America, it's still a good thing to ask your family if they know another family who has like a consenting daughter. That's the biggest thing, consenting, who's down to, you know, settle down, you know.
I
If we look at these families based on this, I see a lot of solid families.
I agree. I agree. To be honest, you know why I have a problem with the traditional matchmaking and arranged marriage in general is because there's a trend I'm seeing right now, George. To be honest with you, I am seeing in my circle, in our age, a lot of divorces
Mm,
that I didn't see before. To be honest, and I'm taken aback a little bit. Not because I'm judging them, not at all. I'm not judging them for getting out of bad marriages. I'm judging them for rushing into bad marriages. And that's the problem. Because when they are trying to go into bad marriages, you try to stop them or you try to tell them you barely know the person. It's an arranged marriage. How are you going to figure it out? I'm not saying our parents had it the best. Our parents were unhappy, are still unhappy, but because society stopped them from doing it. So that's a big plus that right now, at this age, at a young age, you don't have society breathing down your neck that, hey, you have to stay married no matter if you don't like the girl. All right. Because I've heard nightmare stories. My own family, I've heard my mom give advice to someone saying that have a baby and the problems will be solved. They won't be solved.
no.
But the thing is, that's exactly the advice she used to get from her mom, right? And that's the advice that we have kept. I'll be honest with you, George. There's nothing to hide. My grandparents don't love each other. They don't. They're like, we were bounded together by society. We had 4 or 5 kids. We had to raise them. Now they're all up and living their own lives. And I don't know why I need to be with this guy anymore. And they're both enjoying their own single life in their kids' house separately. The grandfather wants to be like, hey, come, let's go do this. We've been together for like almost 50 years, come on. And there's this love and hate relationship,
Mm.
but you see the reality that it was not consenting, as you said, right? So my question is, now you can consent, but you are consenting, it's like trying to say yes while under the influence of alcohol. Love
Mm.
is the same thing. You might think like it's fun or it's nice, let's rush into it, but the reason that you're divorcing afterwards is because you didn't think this through. And my question is, with the whole rant that I'm going on right now, is that I am not in favor of arrange or traditional matchmaking if it's rushed. I'm not in arrange. I'm not in favor of love either if it's rushed. If you need time, spend time, find the girl of your dreams. Even with your Canadian passport, you go to Lebanon, become an eligible bachelor, date those girls, see what works, because it's not looking good, man. It's not looking good that I see so many single people because they're not willing to settle, because this goes back to a little bit of what you were saying, which I wanted to pick up on, but I forgot. That you say that these youngsters have no purpose, have no meaning. This new generation, no culture, no heritage, of individualism, of selfishness. But what I really think it is, it's no responsibilities.
They're unwilling to sacrifice.
Yeah, but that's because they don't have any responsibilities. The
Mm.
government took away all the responsibilities. You're not responsible for your parents now. You're not responsible for your kids now. You're not responsible even for your own self. If you somehow don't want to do anything, the government pays you money to just be. Because just because you are a Canadian or a Dutch, you get money just for the sake of it. That means you don't need responsibilities. What I've seen is we need responsibilities to function as human beings, or else we won't. Because if you take away all the responsibilities, then you have these people who don't give a shit, who get high all the time, drink all the
Yeah,
time.
they
So
dissolve.
they dissolve.
They
That's
dissolve.
again,
They build
they,
nothing of permanence.
and
Everything is
that's
a
the thing.
temporary fix, and they dissolve.
Yeah, because responsibilities are an anchor in your life.
But I want to talk back about what you
Yeah,
said about
yeah.
the relationships, the arranged marriage, and all that.
Mm.
It's like, yeah, but the point is like that's the key thing: consent, not coercion. Like there's some parents, like I heard cases where like their daughter just broke up with her long-term boyfriend, and then they shove all the like husband applications in her face, and she's like she's like in a period of like suffering, so she just says yes to anything. That's not consenting. That's coercion or exploitation or manipulation. No, no. But I think what the beauty here, the beauty we see here is similar to a concept called Spraga. It's a Dutch thing, I think. It's a Dutch word,
Oh,
but it applies to the Amish in America. You know the Amish? They have this thing called Ramspraga. I forgot how to pronounce it. Sorry, Amish people who aren't even watching this because they don't have computers. But so when one of their kids come of age, they go out into the world. They experience everything: drinking, party, I think sex and alcohol and drugs, and then they choose to come back to the community or not. I think we're seeing this time in our lives where we've kind of realized all that thing they talk about being an individual, being your own person, being like boss queen or whatever. It's not as great as they said it was. So now we're going back to our roots, but we've still learned enough from individualism that we're doing it from a place of consent. Like I'm down to have my mom arrange a marriage, or sorry, traditional matchmake, so long as I have the final say. I'm down to adopt like Lebanese culture and stuff, but that's because I see the value of it. I want to adopt the Lebanese culture of community, of how they respect their guests, how they make the debke, the dancing, the food. But I
the dancing.
choose to back away from the like almost like martyrdom obligation to the family. So like I
Exactly.
think like again it's all about the balance, and like we are seeing a lot of divorce, and I'm not sure if you're referring to divorce mainly among immigrants or among
General
Europeans,
population. General
general
population here.
population. Yeah,
Yeah.
like I think divorce is increasing on actual both sides, immigrants and general population. So, like, primarily white Canadians and Europeans, because on the white European side, there's no foundation, there's no concept of responsibility, there's no concept of self sacrifice. You think even though you are married to someone, you're still owed sex with someone else outside the marriage, or like, you have all this media encouraging your freedom and stuff. And then on the other side, you have people from really traditional conservative, controlling families who have experienced freedom. Like they went to a country and then they're like, oh, I love this. I don't want to be married to my traditional, like to my arranged marriage husband or wife. Because I've seen this a lot where they come to Europe and then from the safety of, not Europe, Canada, from the safety of Canada, they divorce the person back home. And they have no qualms about not seeing their family again because their family was so restrictive and oppressive. The biggest factor in all of this for me is consent. We have to choose to go back to our traditional values. We have to see the appeal of it. We cannot see it as debt to our family. We cannot accept the argument that this is how it has to be. We have to choose to be willing to live a more traditional life and be happy with it. What I see in the and this is a big thing for me, the hypocrisy of the East and the hypocrisy of the West. In the East, there is a lot of cultures where women are very controlled. They put, in some cases, you have to wear the niqab, you have to listen to your family, you have to listen to the male figure of the family. You really you can't drive, you have no choice. That's bad. But then we go to the West, where it's like, we have to strip you down, you have to post your nude body on, so not have to, but like it's encouraged. You have to expose your nude body online. You don't have to commit to one partner. Instead of like being controlled by instead of like being the property of your father, your brother, your uncle, your husband, you're the property of the community. And I see this a lot in university, even high school, as young as 15, where girls are basically like, they think of it like it's their own idea, but the way the culture puts it, they're the property of all the guys around them. They don't have to commit to anyone. They don't have to be in a relationship. They don't have to stick to one person. It's all for the community. And the guys who don't want to build a family, who don't want to commit in a relationship, who do not want to stick to one partner and devote themselves to that partner, they're loving this. They're called fuckboys. They're
Yeah.
loving this generation where, like, there's no obligation to a traditional family. They're taking advantage of it. So in
Yeah.
my so to sum it down, in the East, women are covered up. In the West, women are stripped down. I
But
think
they're
it
both
has
doing the
to
same
come
thing.
to choice. Like in France, I don't approve of the ban of the niqab or hijab. I think it's specifically the niqab. If someone
Yeah.
chooses to wear it, let them wear it. Don't strip them down. In the West, in America, I don't like the idea where if a person wears the hijab in university, they're saying, "Oh, you're old-fashioned. You're part of an obsolete culture." It's like, no, let them wear what they want as long as it's a choice. But having criticized the West, I will criticize the East, where I say, like, if me as a man, and I'm not really a feminist, I don't really subscribe to that culture, but if me as a man, I can have a lot of decision making over my life, I don't see why the average Arab girl cannot have that. It has to be fair.
Yeah.
It all comes down to choice. Let people
No, I
choose what they want.
no, I think this is a wonderful place to end it. There's a lot more to say, to be honest, but we are always near to the hour mark. So this was a lot of fun, George. I hope you had fun as much as I did. I think this was quite interesting for me. So before we leave it up, anything else besides your last remarks that you want to add to this?
Like words of like advice, or what I
No,
want.
just what do you want to leave the reviewers with?
I want to leave the interviewers with a lot of us are in a very similar situation. We're alone in an apartment, working a job we don't like. We're pretty isolated from friends. Maybe dating is not going so great right now. I'm trying not to project. Maybe our significant other is a cat. I don't know where my cat is. He's out there. But we have to keep. I'm not a positive person in general, but I do try to follow positive ideas. And the biggest positive ideas for me is like, we need to try. We need to start with the little things, like what that guy says: make your bed every day, eat healthy. We need to start exercising, because as we get control of the little things, we start to control the medium things, and then we move on to the big things where, inshallah, I say inshallah, we will end up in a place where we can form our families, we can buy a house, we can continue what our parents gave us to the kids we bring.
That's
Inshallah.
that's that's great to hear. Wonderful words of wisdom. And we will also try to start sifting through all the eligible bachelorettes in Lebanon, looking for
I always
George.
tell my family, look, just don't bring me everything except an Armenian woman.
Why an Armenian woman?
Because my mom, then they're all like, why not an Armenian woman? I'm like, because my dad's not happy.
Your dad's not
My mother is Armenian.
your mother. Oh my. Okay. On
And
that
when I
note,
say that, she looks at me, she's like, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. My mom's special. I love her.
On that note, I would like to end this conversation. Thank you so much, George, for your time. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. I hope there was a little bit here that you could resonate to. And if there's a little bit here that you do not agree with, that is also fine. We love to have debates. We do not need to agree with each other. As long as we are respectful to understanding that there are different viewpoints and there's something we learned today, I think that fulfills the purpose of this podcast. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you next time. I just want to give you guys a heads up. The roundtable is beginning for January 2024. The roundtable is a mastermind group where I try to bring like-minded yet cross-functional people in one room under my facilitation, where we will go through goals, ideas, obstacles, even debates, where people are interested about something, they want to learn something from everyone else in the group and basically become a better version of themselves. I'm really, really enthusiastic about this project, and I'm really looking forward to seeing any one of you who wants to sign up and be part of the process. The link is on the website, of course, to sign up. And if you go to our Instagram or any of our social media links, you will see the link as well. It is also here below in the show notes. So if you're interested, just click the link, fill out the form, and I will catch you in an introductory call. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you next time.